I referenced it earlier, and you of course referenced it. But let's talk about what you have called the Greater Boston Track Club cross country debacle. This was September of 2019, right? So you had been dealing with this chronic hamstring issue for what, 3 years or so, 2 or 3 years by that point?
It's been about 3 years.
Yeah. So what happened on that September day at the Greater Boston Track Club cross country race?
And I have to preface this by saying it's still one of my favorite races, and I've since gone back.
Totally fair. Yes, and I do not want to cast aspersions on the Greater Boston Track Club cross country race.
It is an excellent race. So I tore my hamstring, and I felt it about a mile in. It just all of a sudden there was no more connection between my lower limb. I couldn't feel anything on that right side. I didn't feel any pain. I just felt like everything just ripped. And
did you? Sorry. Did you hear a pop, or did you feel a pop?
I heard and felt, and I said, well, maybe it's just, I don't even know what I was rationalizing. I said, well, I'm running for the team, just trying to get to the finish line. So I got to the finish line, but I couldn't drive. There was just no function left in that leg anymore.
Hello, podcast listener. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Eat Half, Walk Double podcast, coming to you from the Ascend Endurance Coaching Studios here in beautiful Stratford, New Hampshire, US of A. I'm your host, Chris Dunn. If you follow the show, thank you very much, and welcome back. So this show chronicles my 4 decades in endurance sports as an exercise physiologist, coach, race director, and athlete, told through the stories of the important, influential, and interesting people I've met along the way. While I catch up with friends, colleagues, rivals, clients, and the occasional family member, it's my hope you'll learn a little something about health, fitness, and the secrets to living well along the way. Haas joins the show. Recently, she took the reins of the New England-based All-Terrain Runner Series. This fun, competitive series challenges runners on 5 different surfaces: track, trail, road, mountain, and cross-country. It's a great opportunity to try something new and experience an entirely new community of people. We discuss each event in the series. Kara, of course, is no stranger to the sport of running. In fact, she's dedicated her entire adult life to it. Several years ago, a devastating hamstring injury almost took the sport away from her. How she worked her way back and the lessons she learned along the way is an important story. Well, here she is, Kara Haas. Kara, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Chris. So happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you here. I'm happy to have you here too. How are you?
I am doing well, enjoying the little bit of snow we're getting. So happy to be in New England right now, as I know you are.
For sure. Yes, I am. Of course, the thing about living in New England is that it's oftentimes feast or famine in the winter time, right? So those of us that enjoy outdoor recreation, we eagerly anticipate the snow. And then sometimes we just get too much snow, which is kind of what happened to us here in New Hampshire. When I say too much snow, I mean, for those of us that like to snowshoe, and I know that you enjoy snowshoeing, I have a fat bike that I like to ride, and I also like to sort of slide around on my skis. Sometimes you need to beat down a track in order to fully enjoy those winter sports. And it can be a little challenging sometimes when you have a foot of unbroken snow that you have to work your way through. So sometimes I would prefer winter to kind of sort of slowly get along, but that's not kind of how she did it just recently. You guys got maybe a little bit less snow where you're at. So for the listener, where you live is just a little bit south of where I am in New Hampshire. How much snow did you guys get out of the last storm?
About 4 inches, so just enough to get the snowshoes out.
Gotcha.
Great.
Yeah, gotcha. So just, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 miles north, and we got a foot of snow here plus. So just a little bit more of a challenge to work around. So recently, you competed at the track at New Balance in Boston, Massachusetts, running the indoor mile in 5 minutes and 38 seconds. It was your first track race post hamstring surgery, and your fastest mile in 6 years. In a social media post following the race, you use the hashtag once a runner. I have an idea of what that hashtag might have meant to you a couple of years ago, but what does that hashtag mean to you now?
For me, it's kind of a little memory, and it still harkens me back to the obsession that I've had lifelong with Quentin Cassidy and the cult classic book, Once a Runner. Are you familiar?
Well, funny that you ask, because what the listener can't see is I'm holding up a video for her to see, and or I'm holding up a book, and the book that I'm holding up is John L. Parker Jr.'s Once a Runner, the cult classic book novel about running. So interestingly enough, I was going to ask you the same question if you had read the book. So obviously you have read the book.
I actually have a signed copy from John L. Parker, and it was probably the first running book I read. Ed Sheehan gave me a copy, my old coach, and it's my favorite. I've read it at least probably 30 times, too many times to count.
Okay. Well, that is quite ironic. And I did not know that in advance, because that was not one of my pre-show interview questions. So that's really funny, because the next thing that I wanted to share with you is this, and I want to get your take on this. So in the book, Parker writes this, and you likely are familiar with this little passage in the book. Cassidy's heart tried to leap out through his taut skin and hop into his wet hands. But outwardly, it was all very calm, very serene, just as always. And it seemed to last a tiny forever. Just like that, a snapshot of them all on the curved parabola of a starting line. 8 giant hearts attached to 8 pairs of bellows-like lungs, mounted on 8 pairs of supercharged stilts. They were poised on the edge of some howling vortex they had run 10,000 miles to get to. Now they had to run one more. Carol, what goes through your head as you stand on the starting line of a mile track race?
Especially the older I get, I have more of a calm confidence that I didn't have when I was younger. So I feel like that would fit me more now. That I've done so many of these, and I feel like I've done pen relays. I've kind of been on bigger stages, and I think now I look at children next to me who could be my grandchildren who are on the starting line next to me. So it's more of a calmness, and it's interesting that you bring that up. I have an opportunity to race at the New Balance Indoor Grand Prix in 2 weeks, which I know there'll be a bunch of Olympians there, and I'm running the exhibition Masters Mile. But I think I'm already getting anxious about it, but I'm hopefully on the surface look calm and ready. And so I could definitely relate to that quote.
Yeah, well, I mean, I always think, as it relates to performance, that anxiety is not necessarily a negative emotion, right? I mean, it's it might otherwise be described as arousal, and arousal is really important from a performance standpoint, particularly an endurance sport standpoint. Well, I sort of asked, I asked that general question about what goes through your head as you stand on the starting line of a mile track race, but more specifically, like just a few weeks ago at the track at New Balance, this was your first track race back after hamstring surgery. Did you still have that sort of calm demeanor, or was there any pre-race jitters? Because obviously you'd done this stuff in the past, but this was the first time that you were going to run hard and fast in a race since hamstring surgery.
It took a long time to get back to that point where I was comfortable enough and confident enough in the strength of my legs and my hamstring that I would not get injured. And we can talk more about that later, but that's kind of been kind of my new mantra post 50 is you have to, from strength comes speed. You have to be strong, be able to do these things.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, for the listener who doesn't know Kara Haas, why don't you introduce yourself?
So I am Kara Haas. I am an aging non-rock star, trying to kind of navigate the struggles and rewards of, I used to call myself a master, but now I guess it's a senior, balancing, just life in general, working full time. I have 2 young children, 8 and 11, coach basketball. So just kind of trying to get a little taste of everything in life and balance it all while still remaining somewhat competitive.
Yeah. Oh, well, you're very modest. You're more than just a little bit competitive. Still, at now that you are just north of 50. Well, thank you for that introduction. And I do want to get into more of your running and some of the struggles that you've had physically, and how you were able to deal with them and overcome them. But let's share with the listener how you and I came to know each other. Now, as I was sort of thinking about it, and it's always an interesting exercise for me when I have a guest on to try to remember and recollect how I came to know these amazing people that like yourself that I get to have on my show. And while I might not necessarily always specifically remember the moment that we were introduced, I have a general sense of the community through which I probably came to know you. And I'm going to guess, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to guess that it was the New England mountain running community that likely was the conduit through which you and I came to know each other. Is that your recollection?
Yes, absolutely. I think specifically Loon was the first time that I met you, and I kind of held you on a pedestal too as this mountain guru, and kind of also a little bit diabolical because you love these crazy technical trail races. So that's that's my recollection of meeting you.
Well, in this particular case, I'm going to take diabolical as a compliment.
Absolutely, in the best way possible.
Yeah, very, very fond memories of Loon and watching you race there. I'm sure that we probably crossed paths as participants in the event before Paul Kirsch brought me into the fold as a co-owner and race director at Loon. So we likely were racing at the same events, probably long before we actually had an opportunity to meet through the Loon Mountain Race. The Loon Mountain Race is somewhat of a beloved mountain race for you. Would you say that's fair to say?
Oh, it's my first mountain race. So my husband grew up in New Hampshire, so we spend a lot of time up there. His parents had a place at Loon Mountain, so that was the first place I ever skied. So that's kind of, when I think of New Hampshire and kind of my inroads into mountain running and my husband's family as well, I think of Loon Mountain, and I love that race. I love that whole experience. I remember doing it the first year, and there was under 100 people there, and it's just the mountain running community too. It's a whole different breed, and they're just wonderful, kind, heartfelt people who are just there to support each other. So I'm so happy to be part of that.
Yeah, and there's there is a little bit of overlap, obviously, between the mountain running community and the trail running community. Those two communities are really very similar. What's fairly dissimilar to the mountain and trail running community is the road running community. However, dissimilar meaning they're generally different groups of people. However, you're a really good example, and there are others, obviously, but you're a really good example of someone that crosses over between on-road and off-road stuff. And we're going to talk a little bit more about all the different surfaces that you train on and race on, and we're going to talk about some opportunities for New England runners to maybe get engaged in a new surface of racing a little bit later on. Tell me that I am not misremembering this, but it seems to me that I remember you posting one winter. You had posted on social media. I think it was a photo from the top of, if it wasn't the top of North Peak, it was up near the gondola. I'm not quite sure. Anyway, it was somewhere at the Loon Mountain Resort, and it was wintertime, and you had snowshoed to the top of the mountain. Am I misremembering that, or did that actually happen?
Yes, and I didn't get caught, so I guess.
Okay, now I think the statute of limitations has probably run out on that infraction. So do you care to tell that story of how you snowshoed to the summit of Loon Mountain that one winter?
That was when, so I was training for Squaw Valley. I think it was 2004. That was where the nationals were held that year, and there was really no uphilling at that point in time in New England. That was kind of a new, snowshoeing was a new concept, and uphilling, you just didn't hear of it. There wasn't skinning. Fortunately, there is now. So I just thought, I am just going to do it. And worst case, someone yells at me, and then if they yell at me and ask me to leave the mountain, of course I will. I'll leave the mountain, but nobody did. And at the top, the man who was working the gondola at the time was so polite. So, would you like a ride back down? I said, I'd love a ride back down. So it worked out great.
Well, that's a funny story because, and it's sort of, and while that was it sounds like that was many years ago. That sort of friendly demeanor, I think still characterizes the staff at Loon Mountain Resort. They are just some of the friendliest people that I've ever met in that line of work. Well, that's super fun. Well, let's talk about your running. And I'm interested to hear a little bit about how it has evolved. You mentioned that you are 52.
Yes.
Yes, 52 years young. And you've been running since you were 18.
Yes.
Yes. But you didn't start out as a runner. Well, you were running probably as a consequence of participating in other team sports. But you really started as a youth in team sports. Is that true?
Yes, I think, and we touched upon, I know that you have a parent who's involved in coaching as well. And I really kind of credit that with my interest in athletics. My father was the basketball coach in Air forever. So my brother and I grew up as gym rats. We were the ball boy, ball girl for my dad. So since I was 2 years old, I was going to the gym. What's really interesting about Air too was it was primarily a military base at the time with Fort Devens. So the athletes that he was working with really came with some amazing values. And I also learned a lot about discipline and values from his players and from my dad as well. But they would come over every weekend for dinner. They would have dinner at our house. My dad would run basketball camps in the summer. So what I really learned was that I just fell in love with the concept of athletics, how being an athlete kind of transcends yourself. So the concept of where the team athletes take care of each other, they build each other up. It really shaped how I viewed all of my relationships, how important it was, kind of the you sweat together, tears, triumphs, those bonds are just the strongest bonds you have. And I just fell in love with athletics in general, basketball in particular. In high school, I played basketball, field hockey, and softball. I played basketball for a year in college and realized I was just way too small. I was just getting, I just wasn't, I didn't have the ability or the size to compete at a D2 level. And my friend at the time said, why don't you just try out for the cross country team? They don't make any cuts. I said, oh, okay. Sounds like fun. I run anyway. So that was kind of how I transitioned into running at the time.
Yes, we do share that in common, that our dads were coaches, and sounds like to me that he was a very strong influence in your life, particularly as it relates to athletics and sport. And of course, my dad very much the same way. You also mentioned something to me earlier that that brought back some nostalgia for me too. You sort of referred or referenced something related to the smell or certain smells, from that time in your life, bringing back a very strong sense of nostalgia. And I can certainly relate to that too. My dad was a football coach, and I was tagging along to football practice, when I was very little, and hanging out in locker rooms and messing around, and then of course, heading out on the practice field. And to this day, and I wonder if this resonates with you, maybe in a little different way, but to this day, for me, when I smell freshly mowed grass in the summertime, I mean, it instantly brings me back to the football practice field in the summertime, right after the field had been mowed. Like it's a very strong sense of nostalgia. Do you?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Does that resonate with you?
I walk into a gym and I just, breathe it in. I coach basketball now, and I'll just say to the girls, breathe it in. Don't you love the smell? It takes me back. And it's just, there's a locker room too, that dirty sock smell, whatever it is, it just takes me back. I love it. Bottle it.
Well, you're a mom of girls, and so maybe maybe it's not the same. But as a dad with at least one son, a sweaty sock smell around the house has a little bit different sort of nostalgia than and my girls. Because they do listen to the show, their feet did not stink, but my son's feet did stink, and that was a totally different kind of smell and different sort of nostalgia. So you ran on the cross country team, and this was at St. Anselm's?
Correctly, in Manchester, New Hampshire. So
Yeah.
another New Hampshire connection.
Yep. So you ran cross country at St. A's. Was 18. Was that, geez, did you run did you run 3 out of the 4 years? Is
I did. Yes.
my math right? Yeah. Okay. And did you have any measure of success during that period of time?
I was All-American there, so I
okay.
I didn't know any better. I didn't know any different. I had a wonderful coach, Joe Neal, who I think really knew that he had to rein me in a little bit. He kind of had this basketball player who would go to the extreme and work out 6 times a day if was allowed to. So he was really good at kind of reeling me in and saying, okay, we're going to focus. We're going to cut back a little bit on what you're doing. I credit any success I had there to him. He was just a wonderful coach. We were NE10 champs too. So I won NE10, made nationals and All-American. So by senior year. So it got me hooked. That's for sure.
So then you graduate from St. A's, and you continue to run.
Yes.
How did you did you continue to scratch that competitive itch after college, when in your 20s and 30s, or did you move away from racing? What did your running look like in your 20s and 30s?
So I think directly out of college was when I really got involved and really wanted to pursue it further. I was running for the BAA with Ed Sheehan, who again, he passed away, but just another amazing coach. And running kind of became my entire world at that time. I really wanted to try and make the Olympic trials in the 5,000. So I worked hard with Ed, and he took me to places like Penn Relays to attempt to do that. And then within that year too, I got a job at Saucony. So I was working for Saucony in a running capacity as well. I ran, I guess I don't know if they called it professionally. I think it was just because I was working for them. They were kind enough to send me to some cool places. Like I got to run in the World Corporate Championships, became friends with people like Lorna Kiplagat from Kenya. So that really kind of in my 20s really shaped my world at that time. And it was just all about running, which I was young, I was single. So it was a perfect time to really just focus and be selfish on my running. As I got a little bit older, in my 30s, I moved towards a marathon, and I was working with Fernando Braz, again, trying to make the Olympic trials in the marathon. And I realized pretty quickly that I am not a marathoner. I had a hell of a time trying, and I loved it. I enjoyed it and just loved that. I love the 100-mile weeks. I loved being able to see what my body could do. But by the time I hit 40, I realized, I maybe need to reel it in a little bit with this competitive, crazy running drive.
Well, reining it in is a relative thing, of course. What was your PR in the marathon during the time in which you were training for it in a dedicated way?
I never got that fast. I got down to 2:52, so I never really. If I was running a 1:18 half, I should have been running a lot quicker in the marathon. So I knew that it really probably wasn't for me. I just wasn't a good marathoner, but I enjoyed doing it.
Well, and I think for most runners, or for many runners, who sort of start at the 5K distance and then sort of eventually start dabbling in 10Ks, and then they realize that half marathons are a thing, and they start doing that, handful of half marathons, and then of course there's the marathon distance, which is it's a shiny object for a lot of runners, right? And many of them pursue it. For you, after spending a couple of years really dedicating yourself to the marathon distance, and maybe really not experiencing the breakthrough like you kind of thought that maybe you would, based on some of your earlier successes. At that point, now that you're approaching your 40s, what changes? Where does your focus begin to shift? Do you begin to think, maybe I might want to dabble in other surfaces, or maybe I might want to fall back to some shorter distances? Where were you then in your 40s in terms of your running?
I think a couple things changed my focus. I became a mom at 41, so I had kids quite a bit later. So then, obviously time constraints and just interests. I wanted to be home with my girls as much as I could. I had one at 41 and one at 43. So the focus was more taking care of them and just kind of running for an outlet and just to stay healthy. I did try to push hard a little bit too quickly on the speed coming back from pregnancies, and that we can get into that later. That's kind of where my hamstring issues started. But I kind of returned to the track at that age because, one, you can train for the track in a lot less time. And I also got into some mountain running and returned to snowshoe running at that time, just whatever time would allow. And I think I had a much healthier relationship with running. It was more something I looked forward to. If I got 30 miles a weekend, that was great. So it was, I think, a healthier balance at that point in my life. The girls helped me with that.
Yeah. All right. So that's an interesting point, right? So in your 20s and 30s, perhaps your relationship with running wasn't as healthy, if I'm sort of reading correctly between the lines here, during that period of time, during your 20s and 30s, in which again, you were single, or at the very least, you didn't have kids at that point, right. And so you were employed in a running industry. So running would seem to me that running was the entirety of your existence at that point. Would you, upon reflection, as you think back to your running self in your 20s and 30s, how would you have categorized running? Would you have categorized it as a passion, as an obsession, or as an addiction?
Probably a little bit of all three. Definitely an obsession. I think it still is. I don't think I'll never give it up. But yeah, I think a little bit of an addiction, especially when you're in that culture where you're around people and everybody's running and you're working on shoes and that's the focus of everything. So that's kind of your world, and your world can get really small quickly if you kind of have that type A personality and that's your mindset. So I would say a little bit of all three, but definitely on the obsessive side.
Yeah. Well, and I think, look, I think in order for elite athletes to be elite, and to capitalize on the on the gifts that they are given, they have to take their sport to that level, to the level of obsession. You can't part-time greatness, right? I mean, truly, if you want to optimize the potential that you've been given, you really have to go to that level. So I don't necessarily see obsession as a negative thing necessarily, right? I mean, clearly there's a little bit different step when an obsession goes to an addiction. In other words, you're participating in the behavior, despite the fact that that might be having physically devastating effects on you, right?
Right.
That's when I think it can tend to cross the line. Well, you mentioned that you might have pushed a little bit too hard to come back, or to get back to running, or at least to get back to running fast after pregnancy, and you developed a hamstring issue that became a chronic issue for you for several years. What was going on at that time? Can you talk a little bit about that hamstring issue that you had?
Well, I think mainly it was a product of not doing strength training, and I had neglected strength training for 20 plus years. So I think I brought this all on myself. It was my hamstring was my own fault. And then, especially coming back from a pregnancy, not taking the proper steps to build back that muscle strength, kind of retrain the body. And the older I get, I realize that's probably the most important thing. I do strength training more than I run now. It just becomes so much more important the older you get. And I was teetering because I was running so well that I felt like I could neglect that. So that led to, it was my right hamstring, just constantly, chronically off and on. I would try to run through it, get treatment done on it, and think I could continue to run well on it. And I was able to for a while. And then finally, it just snapped. Literally, the whole hamstring just pulled from the bone. And I think that was, again, I brought that on myself. I didn't back off when I saw the signs. I didn't do the proper strength training and the proper rehab from pregnancy.
And this, so we're gonna talk about what you call the Greater Boston Track Club cross country debacle. We're gonna talk about that in a moment, but let me back up for a minute. So I want to talk about that period of time in which you were dealing with this chronic hamstring issue. Again, if I'm remembering correctly, you had a little bit of dyskinesia. You had a little bit of trouble coordinating your gait and stride. Again, am I remembering that correctly?
Dyskinesia is a perfect term for it. I would call it my loss of coordination, and I still think it was related to the hamstring not firing properly. The neuromuscular firing was not working. I think the sciatic nerve was damaged because I had such tendinopathy in there. So but that was the feeling. I was telling my leg to go, and it was not responding. The neuromuscular coordination was not there, and it needed to be retrained. And
I remember that actually quite vividly. Some of your posts about that, and your experience working through that. That must have been incredibly frustrating for someone who ran strong and ran free for so many years, to experience this phenomena in which their legs just wouldn't work. Like an activity of running, which is almost instinctual, became something that you sort of lost the coordination and ability to do. That must have been incredibly frustrating.
It really was. And it was like, I kind of pursued every avenue to try and fix it. shockwave treatments, a lot of, not PT yet, just different methodologies, dry needling. And I think once it finally did totally pull from the bone, I think I realized it's basics. It's just retraining the body, building up the muscle first. And then it's not just enough to do the PT, you have to do the neuromuscular portion too, retrain the body to function the way it's supposed to without forcing it, kind of being in a gentle state of letting your body heal the way it's supposed to and not forcing the motions, which I think took age and wisdom to get to that point.
Mm. Yeah, it sort of reminds me of the expression that I like to use, and that is denial is not just a river in Egypt, right? So how were you able to rationalize this fairly significant issue that you were continuing to run through? How did you continue to rationalize it? How did you not come to a point in which you were like, I need to stop. I need to stop running. I need to get this fixed. Or maybe you did that.
No,
how did you work through it?
I have, unfortunately or fortunately, a very high pain threshold. And so I would feel pain, but I'm like, I can work through it. So I would always try and work through it. And I think that was a big negative for me, not listening to my own body and recognizing these are signs. And it's kind of at that point, what do you have to prove anymore? Why are you trying to do these things? Why not just back off a little? And it really took the full tear for me to totally reassess everything, which was probably the best thing to ever happen to me in retrospect.
Yeah. You did a pretty good job, I think, of hiding the struggle, the physical struggle that you were going through. I think it was during that time period. I saw a photo of you on Upper Walking Boss, which is a section of the Loon Mountain Race. It's the last traditionally, it's always been part of the Loon Mountain Race course, but over the last couple of years, this section of the course called Upper Walking Boss has been the final kilometer of the course. And it's on a grassy, sometimes not well mowed ski slope, whose grades approximate 40% grade, like almost literally it's hand over hand for a kilometer. And that's, by the way, that's after having run, 5.5 or 6 miles before you get to that final kilometer of Upper Walking Boss. I think it was during that period of time. I saw a photo of you on Upper Walking Boss, and you have a smile from ear to ear. How you must be alien because it's funny. The one particular photo that I'm thinking of, you have this. You have a Cheshire cat grin on your face. And the gentlemen, plural, that are behind you their heads are down. They have drool or spittle coming from their mouths, and literally they are crawling up the mountain. And you look like you're out for a Sunday stroll. How did you? I think I know, but how do you manage to smile on Upper Walking Boss?
I'm probably just hiding things well.
Okay,
would
fair.
be my guess. It might have been a grimace too. Everyone always thinks I'm smiling at the end of the race, and I think it's a grimace. I'll go with that.
Well, potato, grimace, smile. To me, it looks like a smile. And I almost bet that at least part of it is the photographer behind the lens, Joe Vijay, likely called out your name, and that's always a little bit of a morale boost when you're running in any race, right? Whether it's Scott Mason snapping photos of you and calling out your name, or Joe Vijay doing the same. Sometimes that little mental lift can at least temporarily put a smile on your face, at least long enough for the photographer to get a really great photo of you. So I referenced it earlier, and you of course referenced it. But let's talk about what you have called the Greater Boston Track Club cross country debacle. This was September of 2019, right? So you had been dealing with this chronic hamstring issue for what, 3 years or so, 2 or 3 years by that point?
It'd been about 3 years.
Yeah, yeah. So what happened on that September day at the Greater Boston Track Club cross country race?
And I have to preface this by saying it's still one of my favorite races, and I've since gone back.
Totally fair. Yes, and I do not want to cast aspersions on the Greater Boston Track Club cross country race.
Because it is an excellent race. So I tore my hamstring, and I felt it about a mile in. It just all of a sudden there was no more connection between my lower limb. I couldn't feel anything on that right side. I didn't feel any pain. I just felt like everything just ripped. And
did you did you hear a pop, or did you feel a pop?
I heard and felt, and I said, well, maybe it's just, I don't even know what I was rationalizing. I said, well, I'm running for the team, just trying to get to the finish line. So I got to the finish line, but I couldn't drive. There was just no function left in that leg anymore.
And it was high hamstring. It was underneath the glute.
Correct, right underneath the glute. All three had torn fully. So that was the big debacle. In retrospect, honestly, it was like the biggest slap in the face that I probably needed to do what I needed to do to get that rehabbed. I would not recommend that route for anybody. I would recommend doing PT and other methodologies before they try that route. But it was what it was. I'm fortunate to be, I think, one of the few that have been able to come back from a major hamstring surgery. I know that not a lot of people come back from it, so I'm definitely very, very fortunate.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And let's talk a little bit more about the surgery. But one quick follow-up question. So you had mentioned that during that 3-year period of time that you had received, or you had been trialing a number of different therapeutic modalities in order to mitigate the issue that you were having with that hamstring. Did that, by the way, include cortisone injections during that period of time?
I got a cortisone injection in 2015, right before Falmouth, in that hamstring. And I should have never done that because I know that weakened it. So 2015 was the very beginning, right after my daughter was born, when it really started to act up. And I would never do that again. I think that I was just so single-minded. I want to run Falmouth this year. I have a streak going, and that.
That line of questioning wasn't necessarily to connect the dots there, just more out of curiosity. And of course, you made a really good point, and you make a good point about the potential connection between cortisone injections and weakening that soft tissue bone connection. Did the physician who gave you that cortisone injection, was there any plan for you to have follow-up injections? And if so, did you decide against that, or was it always going to be just a one-time thing?
It was just one time, and the physician really recommended me against doing it, said, I don't recommend this. And I said, well, I really want to do this race. It was always meant to be a one time, and that was the only time, and I definitely regret doing it.
Yeah, got it. So hamstring surgery, what type of surgery did you have, if you don't mind sharing, and where did you have the surgery done?
So I had the full reconstructive with 3 anchors. So where they take the 3 different tendons and they sew it back right under the glute. It was open surgery, and they used 3 anchors, dissolvable anchors, to hold it back to the bone. I went with Dr. Suzanne Miller at New England Baptist, and she's a marathoner herself and is amazing. She is very particular about who she takes, in that you have to commit to her physical therapy. And she says it's going to be 6 months. And it's going to be a year before you're really doing any sort of running again. She was very straight up front. This is what your protocol will be like. I'm willing to do surgery if you're willing to commit. And she actually has a protocol that she follows. So you had to go with her physical therapist. I can't say enough good things about her. She said, if you follow the plan, you will run again. We will get you back. And I know she had mentioned some other runners who had gone to her and had really good success. So the surgery was a big deal. It was over with pretty quickly. People say they can't even see the scar anymore. So that wasn't, the surgery itself was not a big deal. It was the rehab afterwards.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So you're discharged from the hospital and you begin this 6-month rehab journey. Where did you go to rehab to do your PT, your physical therapy, and how often were you going to physical therapy in the beginning?
So for the first 6 weeks, you're really just at home doing. You can't even sit down. So you're in a leg brace on your whatever side it is, and that's on 24/7. So the only physical therapy that you're really doing is like leg slides in bed, kind of the heel taps, very, very gentle for the first 6 weeks. And she was very strict about that. You can't drive a car. You can't sit down to go to the bathroom. Like it's kind of you have to commit to that 6-month weird window. But after that, I went with, she recommended, his name is Biff. He's at Sports Therapy in Westford. And he also worked he had a Waltham office as well. So we could go to either office. So I ended up using the one in Westford, Massachusetts. They had an Ultra G too. So that ended up being part of the rehab down the line. But it was 3 times a week. And it was very, very gentle at the beginning. I kept saying, when will I be able to walk? It was, the first couple of steps walking, you have to learn to walk again. I remember it was about 3 months in when I actually could go for more than maybe a half-mile walk. And I timed the mile, and it took me 47 minutes to walk a mile. It was such a learning experience that this is like a total brand new retraining. And the plan was very well laid out. So I knew what I'd be doing each week, but it seemed like the gains were so tiny each week, but they really built upon each other, and the plan worked. It was, I can't say enough good things about their whole program, and I would recommend it to anyone if they have to go that route.
Did you have any setbacks during that recovery period?
Yes, quite a few setbacks. I think mentally too, it's a little bit difficult to kind of go into a mindset where you think, okay, I'll be able to do all these things again. The setbacks too, after I was discharged from physical therapy, and one of my good friends had said to me, whatever your surgeon told you, multiply it by 3 as far as a recovery timeline. I had a friend who had a glute reattachment surgery and said, if she says a year, it'll be 3 years. And I thought no, that's crazy. But that was probably the best advice I got, because even after a year, I was nowhere close to anything competitive. So it took 3 years. So I feel like this past year, finally getting back to, and I still do my PT at home 3 times a week.
Early on in the process, the rehab process, did you ever question if you'd be able to return back to running?
No, I didn't let that thought enter. That part of my brain was shut off from thinking those thoughts. So I had a hand crank for the longest time. So I would log time on my hand crank. So I thought, I'll keep my upper body in great shape, did pull-ups. And so I tried to focus on what I could do. Okay, so if I can't do that right now, this is what we can do now.
Where do you think that optimism comes from?
Probably my mom, I have to say. Like I have a very positive family. My dad's a coach. My mom's a 3-time stage 4 cancer survivor, just the most positive person you'd ever meet in your life. So I think just being surrounded by positive people, and my girls were young, they would come and help me get dressed. So I think just being surrounded with a lot of positivity and support really helps a lot.
Yeah, for sure. There's no question about it. There's an energy associated with positivity, right?
Yes.
What's it? The law of natural attraction, right? the more positive energy that you send out into the universe, the more positive energy you get in return, right? So being a positive person yourself just means that positive things and experiences are going to come back, toward you. What do you think? What are some of the lessons that you learned during that rehab?
For myself, two big things. I think the first was being in a position where you have to have everyone do everything for you, and where you can't use your body in the way you want it to. You realize how lucky you really are, because at least for me, it was a short-term injury. There was light at the end of the tunnel. I would be able to do all the things I wanted again. For a lot of people, that's their every day. That's the cards they're given, and they have to deal with that, and mentally and physically. So just kind of a great appreciation for how lucky I am and was. And then just the second thing is the importance of strength training, keeping your body strong. So my kind of new model is pay to play. So I pay with the strength and the weightlifting and any sort of PT to play. Running's the play.
Well, you're preaching to the choir now, because I also believe that strength training is absolutely the key, and I really believe, and I wonder if you would agree, that strength training becomes more important the older that we get, right? So, I mean, we're blessed that we have the ability to do both strength training and endurance type activities. But if you had to choose one or the other on any particular day as we age, I think making the choice to do your strength work, I really think and feel is the key to successful aging. And quite frankly, as I'm sure you would attest, strength training is the key to sustainability as an endurance athlete, right? So for you to be able to enjoy the sport of running as long as you want to enjoy it, strength training is your path forward. Don't you really believe that?
Oh, 100%. I totally believe. And even 5 years ago, I didn't believe that. So I'd say anybody over the age of 30, even, like, it's just so, for anybody, it's so important. Whatever your passions are, you have to have that balance. You have to have the strong body to support the load that it's under.
Well, I'm really glad that you shared that message. I think more, I really would like to see more top-notch elite runners who are doing strength training anyway, just be more public about that, because I think for a lot of people that look up to folks like yourself and want to emulate your successes as a runner, they make the assumption that that all you are doing is running, and that is, and that very well may have been the key to your success in your 20s and 30s and maybe into your early 40s, although to your point, it sort of started to catch up with you.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd love to see more runners who are committed and dedicated to strength as an important complementary activity just be more out there with that, because I really feel like that's an important message. I mean, I can preach it, but at some point people turn me off because what have I ever accomplished? But someone like yourself, I think, incredibly influential. So I'm so glad that you shared that. I think it's really, really important. So what was your first race back from hamstring surgery? What do you remember what the race was, and what was that experience like?
I do. And it was kind of interesting because COVID hit after that. So there were no races, which was such a blessing in disguise. So I couldn't even be rushed into doing anything mentally that I wasn't ready for physically. So the first race was the Bedford Rotary Trail to Ailes in Bedford, New Hampshire, which is just a fun, low-key trail race. And it was one of the first post-COVID races. And I was just so happy to be there. I smiled the whole way. Just could care less what my time was. Just so happy. It was just a 5K. Just thrilled to be able to do it.
Were there? So it was a small race. were there people there that you knew? Was your tribe there, or was it such a small race that you didn't know anybody there?
It was so small because it was one of the first post-COVID. We wore masks for the race. So I think it was, my family was there, my girls did it. We all did it. So I had part of my tribe. So that was
for sure. So you have said that the best part of running is the people that you've met along the way. For you, obviously, you're not going to be able to name everyone, and I wouldn't expect you to. But as you think of that statement, the best. Who are some people that sort of stand out to you?
Probably the most excited was to ever meet anyone in my life was Greta White. So I met her before she passed in 1995. So that was very exciting. Ed Sheehan, Coach Lorna Kiplagat, Meb Keflezighi, meeting him at Falmouth, working with people like Anna Willard and Kim Nadeau for strength training. So we've become great friends. They've helped me so much, both of them. Dave Dunham, we just always seem to run in the same circles. Tommy Leonard, back in the day from the Elliott, Lisa Senator, and a lot of Greater Lowell runners, Melissa Donays, Nate Jenkins, pretty much just every mountain runner there is, because they're just kick-ass human beings. I love all of them.
Yeah. And that's of course that's the challenge when I ask a question like that, because you begin to think about all of the people that you would say hello to when you show up to a mountain race or a trail race or a road race, and you realize there just isn't enough time in the show to be able to mention everyone by name. But truth is, whether you mention them or not, all of the people that you would smile at and say hello to at a race, those are part of the important people that you've met along the way. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm thinking most recently too, Tom and Ellen Raffio, and I've met them very recently. A lot of races they've put on, and kind of what they do for the mountain running community. There's so many people.
There indeed are there are a lot of people that are connected either directly or tangentially as part of those different races and surfaces. Well, speaking of races and surfaces, now that you're in your 50s, your running has begun to become a little bit more diversified in terms of surfaces, right? So talk a little bit about the different surfaces, the different types of races that you're doing now. You're not just racing on the roads exclusively now, are you?
I don't really run on the roads anymore at all. And it's not that. I don't enjoy it as much. I love cross country, has always been my first and foremost passion. So any cross country surface, tracks. I love a good bank track. Like you were talking about the quote earlier from Once a Runner. I just get so excited on a track. The trails too, particularly the mountain running trails. I love a paved road if it's up a mountain, such as a Scutney or Wachusett, but I really love a good trail mountain race, more so the uphill, like a Loon Mountain, Kingman Farm. That was one of my first trail races, actually.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Interesting.
Or any surfaces, I'd say, except for pavement.
Yeah. Which is sort of interesting, and also a really common evolution, I think, for a lot of runners who maybe get into the sport of running by running on roads, because it's an easy entry into the sport. There's a road at the end of your driveway, right? And you literally can walk out of your front door and you can be on a road and you can start to run. So there's a very low barrier to entry in terms of running on the roads. But at some point, right, people begin to hear about and discover that people run off road sometimes. And that's a scary thought and proposition for people, right? Initially, like, how do I know where I'm going? What if there are rocks and roots? is there going to be scary people in the woods that I'm going to need to be frightened of, or maybe less likely there are scary people and more likely scary animals that I'm going to have to deal with, right? And then where do I trail run? Where do people do this? So I think interesting. I think there's a little bit higher barrier to entry for trail running, but how common is it, right, that so many road runners eventually end up on trails? For you, I mean, you sort of started as a cross country runner. You sort of started as an off-road runner. But for you, why move back to off-road running? Why is that important to you now?
I think two things. The surface, I think, is a lot better on an aging body. Just mixing it up with some softer surfaces and kind of the diversity of the terrain. And also just the kind of the people that you meet. It's a really small knit community. If any of the trail or mountain running scene, you see the same people. At a road race, it's a lot bigger. People you maybe would never see again at a race. But I feel like, especially with the New England trail and mountain community, it's really close knit. So I like going back and seeing all those people time after time.
Yeah, and they become part of your tribe, right? We sort of talked about that before. So mostly off-road for you now, trail or track or cross country. Do you have a sweet spot in terms of distance now for you? What's your sweet spot in terms of distance?
My favorite's the mile. It always has been. I've just never been very good at it, but it's as you get older, no one's very good at it. So so maybe that evens the playing field a little bit. But I love the mile. There's something about that concentrate. You can focus on that pain for the 4 laps in it's like your body is perfectly equipped to handle just that right amount of pain and get through. And I love it. I love the mile.
Well, there's clearly a challenge for people that enjoy competing in the mile distance. There's certainly a challenge for many New England runners to get a lot of quality outside training done in the wintertime, mostly because there's a 3-4 months oftentimes here in New England in which the condition of our roads is not great it's not conducive to fast running, ice and snow and slush. And so it can be a little bit of a challenge.
Yes.
Right. To put in a lot of quality running. I'm talking about if you're training for the mile. So do you have access to an indoor track in the wintertime that you can train at?
I could if I wanted to. I don't. I choose instead to do different higher aerobic activities such as snowshoeing or the treadmill, putting it at 15% incline and doing hill sprints. So a lot of more different aerobic capacity, getting that same sensation, but not on a track. And that seems to be working out well. And I also feel like the older you get to, the repetitiveness of a track can lead to injuries as well. So I almost think it's better, especially you can get a really good workout in on snowshoes. If you can find a good field and get some sprint work in on snowshoes, that's tough stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I think, I think as it relates to the mile, right, there's the metabolic training that's necessary for it. But your body doesn't really know the difference between a heart rate of 150 generated on a track or a heart rate of 150 generated on snowshoes, right? I mean,
Right.
a heart rate of 150 is a heart rate of 150. It doesn't matter really the modality. You're training that energy system. But I do think, particularly as it relates to sports like the mile, that there is a neuromuscular component to it, right? In other words, you have to train the turnover.
Yes.
You got to train your legs to turn over quicker. That's not necessarily always what the sport of snowshoe running looks like, right? Because there are times, I mean, I'm just thinking about a snowshoe run I did 2 days ago. It was after that snowfall that we had talked about. We had probably about a foot of new snow. It was powdery snow, but it was unbroken snow, and it was a running day for me. So I grabbed my snowshoes and my dogs, and we headed to our local trail. And of course, nothing had been broken out. It was completely virgin snow. Put my snowshoes on, my Dion's, and I started running. I'm probably going 18-minute miles, and my heart rate is in the 140s. But just because of the conditions, my turnover was really, really slow. I think you can certainly train the metabolic system with these other modalities. It's a little bit more difficult to train the neuromuscular system with some of these other modalities.
That's true. I think drills help with that. So getting somewhere where you can do some drills, even in an open parking lot.
Yeah, good point.
Getting the turnover.
Yeah.
Times.
Yeah, 100% agree. That conversation about different surfaces leads us to the final part of our conversation today. And that is, I want to talk about the all-terrain runner series. This is a new project of yours, and those of us here in the New England running community, all surfaces, are very appreciative of both you and Emer O'Donoghue, who is partnering with you to not reanimate, because this series was brought back last year after a little hiatus, but the two of you are taking the reins over. And I want to talk a little bit about this all-terrain runner series. So, just as a little background for the listener, I was trying to recollect the history of the all-terrain runner series. I'm familiar with it. I have not participated in it as an athlete, but I have participated in it as a race director, interestingly enough. So I'm familiar with the series, but it sort of lost touch with it a little bit. So I kind of went back and just I gave myself a little quick history lesson on it. Now, you probably know this, but for the listener, the all-terrain runner series was the inspiration of Eric Narcisi.
Yes.
Back in 2014. Okay. Eric came up with this idea of a New England-based running series that included representative events from the different types of running here in New England, from track races to cross-country races, a trail race, a mountain race, even a snowshoe race, and a road race. So essentially the idea was we're gonna pick one event from these different surfaces, these different types of running. And I think, although I don't ever remember talking to Eric about it specifically, but I think the intent was to get runners to experience other types of running that maybe they obviously knew about, but we're hesitant about. Road runners hesitant about getting into snowshoe racing, or snowshoe racers or trail racers trying a track race. Is that your recollection, Kara, about how the all-terrain runner series started?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And did you participate in it that first year in 2014?
In a few of them, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in 2015, then, in year two, my event management company, Acidotic Racing, we hosted the Northeast Snowshoe Federation Snowshoe Championship, the regional championship. And our event was the snowshoe event, interestingly enough. So that was my participation. And I also believe that during the time in which I was co-race directing the Loon Mountain Race with Paul Kirsch, I think our Loon Mountain Race was the mountain representative for the all-terrain runner series one year too. But so held between 2014 and 2016 before it was discontinued. So it wasn't held 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, of course, 2019, 2020, 2021. There weren't a whole lot of events being held anyway because of the pandemic. But be that as it may, the series took a little bit of a hiatus before being reanimated in 2022.
Yeah.
All right. So that leads us to this. How were you approached to take the reins on this series, and why is this a project that you have taken on now?
Steve Vaitonis had reached out to anybody who was interested. He just didn't want to see it not be continued. And Emer and I got to talk, and we both said we would love to take this over, mainly because we thought we could kind of bring in maybe some new blood, thinking from the perspective, we're both older. And I think a lot of the people in the past with this series were a little bit intimidated by a race that might be a little bit too long, or 5,000 meter on the track, or a sprint on the track. So this year we really tried to make it so that it's accessible for everybody. So it's the 5 disciplines. So trail, road, track, cross country, mountain, like you were saying. It starts this coming weekend in Rhode Island. And again, we tried to pick events that would be accessible for everybody. So we picked the mile for the track race. Wachusett, it's a nice introductory mountain race. Kingman Farm for the trail race is a really nice introductory trail race. If people have never run a trail race before, it's for beginners, but it also is challenging enough that people who are more into trail running would love it. So that was our big goal this year, was to get some new people to become interested in it and maybe try a sport they've never tried. If you've never tried a trail race, give it a try. You might love it. So that was, Emer and I just got really excited about trying to bring in some new people and bring in better numbers for this series so that more people will be exposed to it. And it's a great little community too. The past year, the people who did it, we all became friendly, and you'd see them at the same race. So we're hoping that it will really take off.
Yeah, there's a certain esprit de corps as it relates to these series, right? These things, whatever the series happens to be, whether it's a Grand Prix road running series, or it's a mountain racing series, or it's this all-terrain runner series. People feel like they're having a shared experience, and that can be a really powerful phenomena.
Yes.
All right. Well, here's what I want to do. I want to let's go through and talk a little bit about the events. Okay. And I want to pick your brain about how you would prepare for these things. Okay. How you would be physically preparing for these things. So that the listener that's maybe thinking that, hey, that sounds kind of neat, but how do I prepare for a trail race, or how do I prepare for a mountain race? Let's talk about that a little bit, okay? And maybe we can talk a little bit more specifically about the event. So I'm looking at their website at the website right now. And by the way, for people that are interested, it's under the newengland.usatf.org. They go newengland.usatf.org. They can find the link to the all-terrain runner series, or you can just do a basic internet search like I did for all-terrain runner series 2023, and it'll bring you to the most current link. One thing to note is that there are a number of abandoned links to previous iterations of this series. So you want to make sure that you include the year 2023 in your internet search to make sure that you are landing on the most up-to-date page. All right. Fair to say?
Yes.
How am I doing so far?
You're doing great.
All right. Okay. Okay. Now you mentioned next weekend. So when this podcast is going to air in a couple of weeks. So we're taping it, but it's going to air, I think, 2 weeks from now. So I'm going to go through the dates. Okay. So track, that's one of the surfaces. Track, indoor. Well, actually, it's not necessarily indoor. It's indoor or outdoor. Depends on the time of year, correct?
There is an outdoor option as well, so people have a choice.
Yeah, and it's either the mile or the 1,500 meter, otherwise known as the metric mile.
Correct.
All right. So technically, just for the listener that's a little bit gets a little bit mixed up with English and imperial units or metrics. The mile is actually 1,600 meters roughly, but the metric mile is 1,500 meters. So we talk about mile or metric mile, it's only about 100 meters difference, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So the track race, though, it's a mile.
Yes.
It's a mile track race. All right. So again, when this episode is released, the first race so there's a number of different track events that you can pick from. It's not just one. In fact, as I'm looking at the website, there are 4 that are listed, but you also note that there are 4 that are listed, and those that are listed, those are going to be the only 4 options, correct, at this point? Okay. Yes. So when this podcast is released, the first race will have already happened, and that was held on January 29th. Okay. But the next mile option for people will be February 19th, and that's at the USATF New England Indoor Championships at Harvard University. All right. So people can register, Kara, people can register for that event. How can they? There's a link. I guess there's a link on the All Terrain Series website. So you can click on the link and that'll eventually take you to a place where you could register online.
So there's a link for each of the events on the website, and there's also a link on there to just sign up for the All Terrain Runner Series. And it's a Google Doc, and that's free just to fill that in, just to let us know that you're in the race. You want to be part of it.
Got it. All right. So, okay. So that's a good point. So not only is it important, obviously, that you register for the event that you want to run, but also make sure that you are including your name for Kara and Emer, that you are going to participate or that you plan to participate in the All Terrain Series. And then March 4th, USATF New England Aloha Mile.
Yes.
I'm assuming it's in Maui, Hawaii. No, what's the Aloha Mile?
I believe it's at the track at New Balance, the new facility.
It is, in fact, at the track at New Balance in Boston,
which is beautiful.
Why do they call it the Aloha Mile? What's the story there?
I don't know. This is the one that Emer and I are kind of in the dark about. It's the mystery one we haven't gotten any information about yet. So
okay, because I'm imagining like a roast pig and maybe leis and fire dancers. I would be disappointed if it didn't have a Hawaiian theme with a name like the Aloha Mile.
That's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
I can't wait to get some details on it. I'm as intrigued as you are.
Okay. All right. Well, and truth be told, Boston, Massachusetts is about as far away from Hawaii as you can possibly get. Okay. So there's some irony in that. I kind of love the name. That's March 4th. Okay. So there are 3 indoor options that we just talked about. And then there's one outdoor mile track option, and that's July 29th, USATF New England, USA Track and Field New England Outdoor Championship. That's the 1,500. And at least on the website right now, you say site to be announced. Is that still the case, that the site is still to be determined?
It's still to be determined. I know it was held at Gordon College last year, so there's a possibility it would be at Gordon College again.
And Gordon College is in the greater Boston area. Is that true?
Yes, I believe it's in Hamilton, Massachusetts.
Okay. Greater Boston, though. I mean, for those of us that don't live in Boston, Yeah, I mean, if you're in the city with all the big buildings, that's Boston. But then Boston is a pretty sprawling place, obviously. So then everything else I call Greater Boston, which includes probably 100 other little towns that would prefer to be called by their name. But I refer to that as Greater Boston. Okay, so because I live in New Hampshire, and anything that doesn't have very, very tall buildings, everything else is called Greater Boston. But right up until just when you go over the New Hampshire, Massachusetts line, as soon as you go from Seabrook, New Hampshire, or Hampton, New Hampshire, and you cross over into Massachusetts, that's Greater Boston for me. Sorry about that. That's what you get. Okay, so those are the track options. All right, now let's move on to trail. So the trail is another one of the surfaces. Once again,
tell us about that, Chris.
Yeah, I can actually tell you about that because I was very pleased when you reached out and asked if we, Acidotic Racing, the event management company that I own, if we would be interested in submitting our trail race, the Kingman Farm Trail Race, as the trail race representative. And of course, we were very interested and very pleased that you reached out. So our Kingman Farm Trail Race is held in Madbury, New Hampshire. And Madbury, New Hampshire is a small little town just adjacent to Durham, New Hampshire, where the University of New Hampshire is located. It's in basically the southern seacoast-ish area of New Hampshire. It's not far from Greater Boston, actually. If you think about it, if you live in Greater Boston, Madbury, New Hampshire is just up I-95 and Route 16, and bang, you're right there. So our Kingman Farm Trail Race, I want to say, I think we're going on at least a decade, that we have hosted that race there in Madbury. You made a really good point earlier when you talked about the Kingman Farm Trail Race in particular it was your first trail race.
It was, and I wasn't scared because I was so afraid to be really technical, and it was very enjoyable. Of course, there's some roots and rocks, and it had a really hometown feel with the baked goods, and it's just a really good feel-good race.
And I'm really glad. I'm glad that you had that experience, because that's sort of exactly what we're going for there. It is typically a smaller event from a participation standpoint. I mean, we're actually we're somewhat limited in terms of participants just based on the parking. We park across the street at Moharimet Elementary School, the little elementary school just across the street from the Madbury Town Hall. They are very kind and generous and allow us to use their parking lot. But it's a fairly small little elementary school because the area is not that big. So we're somewhat limited, which means, this is a race in which it's maybe 100 people, maybe 120 people tops. It's difficult for us to really have any more than that. So it really does have a small hometown, low key trail racing vibe to it. There's not a lot of bells and whistles. It's an old school show up, lace them up. And when the whistle blows, you go run in the woods for 3.5-ish miles.
Mm-hmm.
People always laugh when I say the distance of the race is 3.5-ish miles. They're like, where's the ish come from? The ish comes from, I have a GPS unit, a GPS device that I use to measure the course, but all the rest of you, the 100 of you standing in front of me with GPS devices on your wrist will tell me that you got a different distance. So we don't use a wheel like they would in a road race, right, to certify the course that it's a very specific distance. It's always ish, right? So it's 3.5-ish miles. You may run 3.8, you might run 3.3. You're all running the same course. You're just going to get a different distance. Suffice to say, nobody's going to be out there for 10 miles. Let's just say that. But it's about a 3.5-mile race. It includes a combination of what we call two track or double track, sometimes referred to as carriage roads. These are typically like old logging roads. They're probably 7, 8, 9 feet wide, maybe. And there's any number of those carriage roads that sort of wind their way through the property, which, by the way, the property in which the course runs through is a combination of land owned by the University of New Hampshire and land owned by the town of Madbury. We avoid any private land owner's property. There is private land owner property there. So if you showed up to take a walk with your dogs and kids and you walked on the trails, you wouldn't know it, but you might be walking on Madbury town of Madbury property, University of New Hampshire property, and then private property. It's all public access use, but generally speaking, or very specifically, we are on UNH property and town of Madbury property. So a 2-track or carriage road in which the surface is very runnable. Now, technical is a term that's often associated with trail running. Talk about technical trails, and of course that's always subject to interpretation, right? Like my definition of technical, as somebody who runs trails all the time, may be different from someone who's never run trails. So I try to hesitate to use the term. I don't always succeed in this, but I try to avoid using the description of it's technical or it's not technical, or it's mildly technical or it's moderately technical or it's lightly technical, just because it's so much based on the user's experience. But very lightly rocks and roots, pretty good surface to run on. And then there is some very short sections of single track, which is a trail that narrows into just one path, wide enough for usually just one runner to be running on. That's what we call single track. So sort of a combination, and that single track, maybe has some rocks and roots, but it's not so much that it becomes cumbersome, unduly cumbersome. I mean, wouldn't you agree that kind of part of the fun of trail running is the fact that it's you got to be paying attention a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. That's the whole fun of it.
It's the whole fun of it until at the end of the race and you're really tired and you don't pick up your feet and you stub your toe in a root and you face plant right before the finish line. So it's all fun until then, but that is all part of it too. So that's the deal with our Kingman Farm trail race. That race, by the way, is Saturday, July 29th. The information about that trail race can be found through the link that Kara provided on the All Terrain Runner Series web page. But folks can also find out more information, including a direct link to our registration, by visiting our website at acidoticracing.com and clicking on our Kingman Farm Trail Race event. The last thing that I'll say about that is that we are very proud that event benefits in part the Doug Flutie Jr. Foundation for Autism. My co-race directors, Tim and Janina Lindsay, their youngest, Cameron, is autistic, and the Doug Flutie Jr. Foundation for Autism it's a very special cause for them, because of their son Cameron. So part of the proceeds of that event will go to the Doug Flutie Jr. Foundation for Autism. All right, so that's the trail race. Road race, August 13th. That's a Sunday. The Bobby Doyle 5-miler. Now I've heard of that. That race is a pretty big deal. That's in Narragansett, Rhode Island.
Yes, and I know it's a very competitive field. I know it's a very fast course. It's one of the races I have not done, Emer has. Loves it. A great after party. It's a fun atmosphere. We thought 5 miles too is a manageable distance for people too. And again, it's fairly flat. It's billed as a fast course. Of course, it's August, so you never know what the day could bring. But it sounds like it's a lot of fun. So and that plus it gets Rhode Island in there too. It is the all-terrain New England all-terrain series, so we wanted to get some of the other states in there too.
Yeah, for sure.
Take it to the beach afterwards.
Right. Yeah. Well, Rhode Island is a wonderful state to visit. I'm sure you've done a little bit of racing there. I've done a little bit of racing in Rhode Island, although it's the smallest of the New England states. It has a very robust running community and a very proud running community, and they have some great events that they host in Rhode Island. So that's cool. I like the idea that Rhode Island is represented. Okay, mountain. The mountain race is May 27th. That's a Saturday. And that's the Wachusett Mountain Race. The Wachusett Mountain Race is part of the USATF New England Mountain Circuit. The Wachusett Mountain Race, I'm going to have you speak to a little bit, is one of those mountain races that you talked about that, well, it used to be a combination of pavement and ski slope when I did it many years ago. And maybe it's the same way now. It was historically, well, at least when I did it, it was an up-down race. So you ran to the very top on the auto road, on the paved road, and then you started back down to finish the race on pavement, and then you bounced off and finished on the ski slope. But the all-terrain runners series representative for mountain is just the uphill only part of the race. Is that true?
That's correct. So the course is still the same. There is the 3 miles uphill and the 3 miles down. We will only score your time at the top. So you have the option for those who want to run back down, and you will access ski slopes down near the bottom. So it's a really pretty trail near the end. So you can get in about a 10K if you want to do the up and down portion. So we felt like that would include everybody, people who just want to do the uphill, people who want to do both. A lot of people do both, and that you get the King of the Hill prize at the top. There's a little cash prize for some of the fast people. But it's 3 miles uphill, and then you can stop at the top if you'd like, or you can continue back down, and your score would count at the bottom for the race, but not for the all-terrain runner series. Your score at the top, your time at the top.
Right. Yes, and so just again for clarification, the 3 mile uphill portion of the race is pavement. It's an auto road, correct?
Yes, it's an auto road. It's paved.
Right. And but it doesn't start immediately up the auto road, right? There's a mile or so that's I believe it's a net gain. You're climbing a little bit, but isn't there a mile or so on the road, so to speak, before you take that right-hand turn and begin to climb up to the top?
Yes, it's actually on Mile Road. So you run your first mile on Mile Road, which is actually the steepest portion of the course. Then you turn into the park. So after like 1.2 miles, you turn into the park, and then it kind of rolls a little bit. So the most challenging part is really the very first mile, kind of rolls a little bit in the middle. There's no real downhills. It's pretty much all uphill. And then the last little section, there's some steepness, but it's a very doable first mountain race experience for people. It's not 40% grade. It's a nice experience.
Yeah, totally agree. Having done it myself a handful of times, and it is hosted by CMS, Central Mass Striders?
They do a great job with it.
Yeah, the Central Mass Striders. They are one of the running clubs here in New England, obviously originally based in Central Massachusetts, CMS, Central Mass Striders. And this is their event, their mountain event that they host. Okay, super cool. And then And then the series wraps up with, with your favorite surface, or one of your favorite surfaces. Maybe they're all your favorite surfaces, but where it all began for you, cross country on November 6th. That's Sunday. That's the USATF New England cross country championships, presumably, at historic Franklin Park in Boston, Massachusetts. Tell us about that.
So we tried to overlap so that if people were choosing to do the New England Cross Country Series or the New England Road Series, there was one from each discipline, so they wouldn't have to double up on the series. They can kind of double dip in each discipline. So Franklin Park, the World Cross Country Championships were held there in 1992. It's just, when you think a quintessential cross country course, that's it. It's a great spectator course. There's the famous Bear Cage Hill, which, if you've seen, what was the movie there? There's a movie that was Bear Cage Hill as part of it. The Departed?
Okay.
There's a famous scene from The Departed. That's Bear Cage Hill in Franklin Park. So the women's race goes up it 2 times for the 6K, and depending on Masters or Open for the men, you either go up it 3 times, or I believe it's 4 times. So either the 8K or the 10K. But it's just such a fun experience. They have youth races to start the day, so it's kind of, you can bring your whole family, just kind of celebrate fall in New England at one of my favorite venues around. It's just a great place to race.
Yeah, very, very cool, and aptly put. It is an iconic venue, and it's an iconic race. If you're a New England runner, you really need to be there and race there at least one time. It's a pretty cool thing to experience. So let's finish with this. So as we sort of went through that, we're talking about this series, really running from, January through November. That's 11 months or so. That's a challenge, right? It's a good thing, obviously, that the races aren't on back to back weekends. That's a good thing that the events are spread out. The challenge, of course, is that the events are spread out, right? So let me get this from you then. How would you suggest somebody go about preparing? I won't say training for it, because it's kind of hard to be training for an 11-month period of time. But if someone was interested in doing all 5 of these disciplines, track, trail, road, mountain, cross country, from this time of year all the way through November, how would you structure the preparation for that? How do people appropriately focus and make sure that they're physically prepared for these things?
I would say to kind of focus on season much as you would in high school or college if you were following a typical running season. So in the winter, focus on perhaps a little indoor, getting some speed work in. As you're approaching the spring, kind of working on some hill work. The weather's nice outside, get on some spring trails to get ready for the trail race, to get ready for Kingman Farm. Work on you could double dip and get ready for a trail race and a mountain race by getting on some hilly terrains if possible. You're getting out there on some nice hilly trails to get ready for the mountain race. And then I feel like probably the easiest for people to cross off training wise is the 5 miler, the Bobby Doyle. So just, you can kind of ride your spring and summer training. If you're training for a fall marathon, you're probably in decent shape to get on the roads at the end of August, at the beginning of August. And then cross country season, getting in a cross country race or 2, if you can, before the 6th, or at least getting on some surfaces to train. By cross country surface, that's trail. It's this very similar.
Yeah. So would you say that it's fair to say that that people don't necessarily have to specifically be training for these things? In other words, if I've got a fall marathon that's really my A race, and that training probably won't kick off until late summer. Do you think it's possible for someone to dabble in these different disciplines while at the same time continuing to train for their A race. Because what I'm thinking is, you know how runners get, right? They're like, well, I'm running the Bay State Marathon in the fall. Like I can't run on a trail because I'm running a road marathon. Do you think it's possible for people to dabble in the all-terrain series while at the same time, preparing for their big A race?
Absolutely. I think it should just be a supplement. And I think it's healthy anyways, once a week to maybe get off road and try the trail, kind of give your legs a break from the pounding. So I think they can definitely dabble and explore some of the other avenues and kind of using it as just something fun to do along the way. You don't have to make it your A race to run up a mountain or to do a trail race. Just make that kind of part of the experience of your training, something different to dabble in, as you said so well. To experience.
Yeah, well, I think you and Emer were really smart with the events that you picked, because they don't take a lot of really focused preparation, right? In other words, runners that are reasonably fit and healthy can jump in on any of these things, right? And again, to your point, most folks that participate in the series probably won't be treating all of these events as their A event. It's truly an opportunity to do something new, to do something different. And I mean, you never know. And that's a big reason why we love to host the Kingman Farm Trail Race. You never know when a first timer is going to show up at your event, a first time trail runner, and fall in love with the sport, not because of what we did, just because they took the leap, because they got a little bit out of their comfort zone, right? And I mean, you never know, right? What's going to happen. I mean, that sort of happened with you at the Kingman Farm Trail Race.
I loved it. I thought, I was very nervous about it. And then once I got there, I said, it's a great atmosphere. The people are so friendly. The race it was just great fun. You kind of throw your watch out the window. You don't care about the time. You just, focus on a hard effort and enjoy the experience.
Yeah. And I really think that's the spirit of this all-terrain runner series. Well, I mentioned the website again, New England, newengland.usatf.org. And I'll also include a link on the show notes too for folks. Are there any social media pages or outlets for this all-terrain series? Is there any other way that people can stay up to date with what's going on in the series?
By following USATF New England on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. So those are 3 venues they promoted.
Okay, good. And I will share those links as well. Anything else that you wanted to talk about, mention about the all-terrain runner series that I failed to mention?
I think you should run it, Chris. That's it.
That wasn't what I thought you were going to ask. Okay. All right. Challenge has been submitted. I can't tell you, honestly, I can't tell you the last time that I purposefully ran on pavement. So therefore I can't tell you the last time that I raced on pavement. But 5 miles is, that's not too long. I suppose I could probably do that.
I'm pretty hot here.
And I've always wanted to race at Franklin Park. Anyway, okay. Well, I am super intrigued. Folks can follow along on my social media outlets to see if I actually took up Kara's challenge. We shall see. Stay tuned for that. Okay, I want to finish with this. It's a part of my show that I like to call 3 random questions. So I submitted to you a number of questions before the show just to let you know kind of what I was going to ask you, but I did not give you these 3 questions. Okay. Because I kind of like to see people think on their feet. And it's fun to get people's reaction to some of these questions that I ask. All right. So last part of the show is called 3 random questions. I'm going to ask you 3 random questions, and you just wing it. Just give me your best off the top of your head answer. Okay. You ready?
Okay.
All right, here you go. First random question. And actually I had to change the first random question because you actually inadvertently already answered this first random question in the intro, so I'm going to ask it a little different way. What's your favorite movie about running?
Chariots of Fire.
Chariots of Fire. Okay, well, that's pretty classic. That's pretty classic. Okay, well, and the original question was, what's your favorite book on running? And of course, you answered that unsolicited in the very beginning.
College is a close second.
Good. Okay, good point. Well, Chariots of Fire, classic running movie. Okay, great. Second random question for you. What's the best piece of advice on running that you ever read or were given?
Probably from my college coach. Make it a lifelong sport and do the habits now to make sure you make it a lifelong sport.
I like that. Follow-up question to that. What is your recollection of what some of those habits were at that time?
We would swim a couple of times a week, and we actually strength train, which in the late 80s, 90s, there wasn't a lot of that in programs. I wish I had continued his advice after college, but I think that was very, very good and very important advice.
It's kind of like the idea of focusing on the little things.
Yes.
Right. Because if, if you do enough of the little things, it can make a really big difference.
Right.
Right. But the little things aren't necessarily the fun and sexy things to do, right? The fun and sexy thing to do is go run, and to go run fast. But truth is, if you want to run fast for a really long time, meaning, years and decades and throughout the entirety of your life, it really is the little things, right? Mm-hmm. that equate to sustainability. Okay. Last question I have for you. Actually, this is quite recently become my favorite question to ask endurance athletes, because I get a host of different reactions to this question. It's really, really fascinating. You're hosting a group run, and you can invite 3 VIPs. Okay. Now, you can assume that any VIP that you would invite is a runner, even if you don't know that to be true. Assume that anyone that you would think of is a runner. Okay, so this isn't necessarily just runners. It could be anybody. Now, these guests may be known to you, or they may be someone that you have never met.
Can they be fictional?
Hang on, you're getting ahead of me. Very eager. They can be. This is the next part of the question. They can be real people, or they can be fictional, meaning a cartoon, movie, or book character. They can be from the present, or they can be from any time in the past or future. They can even be you from the past, or you from the future, joining this group run. So Kara, who are your 3 special guests?
Okay, so 11 from Stranger Things is coming with me.
Oh, okay. Hang on. I got to make sure I understand some of these. 11 from. Okay, so Stranger Things is a series, a Netflix series, I think.
Yes.
Okay, I've not seen it, but 11 is a character from Stranger Things.
Yes, from Stranger Things.
Okay, yeah. 11. All right, so people that watch the series that are much hipper than I am will understand that reference. Okay, thank you. 11 from Stranger Things. That is guest number 1.
So Quentin Cassidy,
of course, the fictional character, the protagonist from the book Once a Runner.
And probably Mahatma Gandhi, just to kind of pick his brain on things. Those would be my 3.
Fascinating. I love how this goes sometimes. A fascinating list of characters. That's actually the first time that I've had a television character, and a character from a book. And of course, Gandhi makes his first appearance in my podcast. So that's not an awful thing at all. Well,
with discipline, he would be great at the run.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine your friends would probably chew his ear off, I'm sure, right? That's phenomenal. Kara, thank you so much for sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I'm so happy to be part of it. And thank you for letting me share my story. I appreciate it, Chris.
Mahatma Gandhi is quoted as saying, "Strength does not come from winning. Your struggles develop your strengths. When you go through hardships and decide not to surrender, that is strength." Kara most certainly did not wave the white flag in 2019, despite that devastating injury. And by her own admission, the injury, surgery, and recovery necessitated she shift her focus and attention to the little things that make running as a lifetime pursuit possible. Well, once again, you've been listening to the Eat Half, Walk Double podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please circle back to the homepage and click the follow or subscribe button to stay up to date with all the new content. And of course, if you really enjoyed the show, please consider sharing it with your friends. I'll be posting some supporting media on my Twitter account at Coach Chris J. Dunn and the show's Facebook page at Eat Half, Walk Double. So please make sure to check that out. And lastly, remember, the secret to living well and longer is to eat half, walk double, laugh triple, and love without measure. Until next time.